So what I'm going to do is encourage you to put on your headphones, which are on your seat. So there is a pair of headphones on every single seat. This is a headphone stage. So if you can all put your headphones on, then you'll probably be able to hear us a bit clearer. We're not going to be wearing headphones because we've got a speaker here, but it's much easier for you because there's a bit of an echo downstairs if you haven't been to this stage before. So everyone's got their headphones on, nearly everyone. Thank you. So, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? Can you put your hand up if you can hear me? Okay, amazing. Great, okay. So hello, my name's Maeve. I'm Maeve Campbell. I'm a climate journalist. I'm based in London, if you haven't met me already. I work for Channel 4 News mainly, and I write articles for various UK newspapers too. I'm really, really pleased to be here today on the balcony stage for this next session, because I think it is maybe one of the most important sessions we are going to have over the next few days, because it's all about the law. And the law isn't boring, as you will hear from our panelists. The law is actually crucial if we want to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. Over the next hour, we're going to be exploring how strategic litigation and legal advocacy, we will explain what those two things mean, are helping to shift climate action from voluntary commitments to obligations which have real consequences in our world. Using the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change campaign as a flagship case, we will explore and examine how youth and island nations are pushing international law forward and what it takes to embed the preservation of nature into both legal frameworks but also into social norms. So before we start our discussion, I have the pleasure of welcoming to the stage Laura Clark to introduce us to the topic. Laura is the CEO of Client Earth, which is a legal environmental charity based in the UK. She joined Client Earth in 2022 after 2 decades in public policy, including diplomatic roles across Africa, Asia, and Europe. And her most recent role before that was British High Commissioner to New Zealand and Governor of the Pitcairn Islands. Laura is an expert in all things litigation and knows how to make an impact. Please give her a very warm welcome.
Well, thank you so much, and it's such a pleasure to be here today at Change Now. I want to start by reflecting. I've just returned from a work trip to the Philippines. Now, Nicole, as a Filipina, knows this better than anyone. There's no time for climate denial in the Philippines. There's no culture wars. The Philippines contributes just 0.3% to global emissions, but it is the 7th most impacted by climate change in the world. Typhoons, extreme heat, flooding, drought, rising sea levels, all are severe and all are increasing in intensity in terms of lives lost and damage done. So in the Philippines, and as was clear in all my meetings, it's not a question of whether action should be taken, it's how fast it can go. So Client Earth has been working over the past year to bring its legal expertise to bear in supporting the regulatory reform needed for the energy transition. But while I was there last week, talking about the legal frameworks needed for green energy, the country was in crisis. The government declared a national emergency due to the war in the Middle East, the blocking of the Straits of Hormuz, and the severe impact on the country's energy supply. Philippines has had an almost 100% increase in gasoline and diesel prices, which impacts everything: electricity, transport, agriculture, consumer goods, and of course, with the country's most vulnerable populations, the urban poor and off-grid communities and remote islands suffering the most. And all from a conflict far away in which it played no part. So there is a double injustice at play here. Countries like the Philippines are the most exposed to economic shocks that they did not create, and they are the least able to absorb them, just as they are on the front line of climate impacts that they did not create, and really struggle to absorb those. And what is playing out in the Philippines is, of course, playing out in different ways across the world. So what is the cause of this deep double injustice? The economic impact, the climate crisis? Well, it's clear it is our fossil fuel energy system. Fossil fuels are at once driving climate change and damage in the Philippines, economic damage, loss of life, and they are holding the country's economy hostage. And the Middle East conflict shows us yet again how exposed our energy system leaves us. We have built a system that depends on fuels concentrated in specific regions being transported through narrow and vulnerable routes and priced on global markets that react instantly to disruption. So when conflict escalates in one part of the world, the consequences are felt everywhere. Now that is the system we have. Now, estimates of the global GDP losses from the ongoing conflict range from 0.54% if the conflict of GDP, if the conflict ends now, to more than 3% and more if the war continues. Yet opponents of climate change tell us we can't afford net zero. The UK Climate Change Committee just recently released a report saying the cost for the UK of getting to net zero by 2050 is the cost of just one fossil fuel energy shock. And of course, we always have more than one. Now, all of us here in this room know that renewable energy is cleaner, safer, and now mostly cheaper than fossil fuels. It's also less vulnerable to geopolitical shocks. It's harder to bomb a wind farm or hold the sun hostage. And crucially, it can be homegrown, reducing dependence on a small number of global suppliers. So the only real path to energy security, energy sovereignty, and therefore national security is through renewables. So the question then is, why are we still so dependent on fossil fuels? Well, because of the multiple ways in which they're integrated into our economic and political systems. Let me take subsidies as one example. Globally, explicit fossil fuel subsidies, government money, taxpayers' money going into the fossil fuel industry, reached around $1.5 trillion in 2022. So taxpayers' money is being used to give fossil fuels an unfair advantage, delaying investment into renewables, fueling the climate crisis, and prolonging exposure to volatile markets. Now, I am perennially amazed that there isn't more outrage about this, that our money, our taxpayers' money, is being used to accelerate a climate crisis that threatens our very future. Now imagine for a moment what you could do else with 1.5 trillion a year. Education, health, world hunger, the list goes on. Now, subsidies are just one example of the perverse system we've created, where we're dependent on fossil fuels, the very thing that causes us harm. So the question is how we change that system. And a big part of the answer is the law. Now, the law, used in the right way, can drive the progressive change we need for a better future. It can change the rules that shape how the system operates. It can hold governments and polluters accountable for the damage done. And it can equip people with the tools they need to drive change from the community level up. We've seen this before, of course. We saw it with suffrage, with civil rights, with marriage equality. In each case, progress didn't come from the law alone or from public pressure alone. It came from both, from this pincer movement. Public outrage and campaigning shifted what was politically and socially possible, and legal frameworks then locked in that change, further shaping norms, incentives, and expectations. Now, climate change is now at that same point. And law becomes the way that societies turn intent into obligation and into durable change. And it is increasingly being used to say climate harm is not abstract, and climate action is a question of duty, not discretion. So this is the space that Client Earth has been operating in for nearly 2 decades, using the law to protect people and planet, bringing legal cases, helping to build the legal frameworks for broader change, and supporting people around the world in using the law to defend the environment and uphold their rights. Since our inception, we have stopped major fossil fuel developments, closed the space for spurious green claims with greenwashing litigation. We've supported governments with environmental legislation, and we've worked with communities across the world to protect forests and oceans and hold polluters to account. So we've been doing all of this to play our part in how we change the systems. And last year, the world's highest court gave that legal climate movement a massive shot in the arm. In a momentous decision in July last year, the International Court of Justice affirmed that action on climate change is a legal requirement. Now, this decision from the ICJ didn't come from nowhere, and we're going to hear more about that today. It was the culmination of a journey begun when, in 2019, a group of students in a classroom in the Pacific asked a simple question: what are governments legally required to do under international law about climate change? Now, with the support of Vanuatu, they built a movement. They carried that question to the United Nations and ultimately to the highest court of the world. And the court responded. Now, in its advisory opinion that was unanimous, which is also rare, the court made clear that states have a duty under international law to cooperate in addressing climate change. It recognized that countries that have contributed the most to historic emissions carry a greater responsibility to act. It was clear that a healthy environment underpins the enjoyment of human rights protected under international law. Now, it was also clear, importantly, that governments are obliged to regulate the climate impacts of companies operating within their jurisdictions, and that failing to curb fossil fuel production and consumption, approving new fossil fuel projects, or continuing to subsidize fossil fuels could constitute internationally unlawful acts. So in one sentence, to sum up, the ICJ decision made clear that climate action is not a question of political discretion, it is a legal obligation. Of course, this opinion from the ICJ, it's an advisory opinion, it is not legally binding, but it is an authoritative articulation of what international law requires. And it will be used by ministers, officials, judges, and prosecutors around the world. It will influence climate policies, international climate negotiations, and it opens new pathways for climate litigation against governments. It strengthens all those who seek to use the law to drive change. It strengthens, for example, the basis for legal action and campaigns to challenge subsidies, the continued use of public money to support fossil fuels, with which I started this speech. And now we're increasingly seeing cases about whether public money can lawfully be used. It is be spent in ways that entrench pollution when governments have legal obligations to reduce emissions and protect people from harm. Client Earth has brought a number of these cases, and when these cases succeed and they scale, when environmentally harmful subsidies are withdrawn or redirected, markets respond quickly, investment shifts, and the playing field levels for renewable energy, and you get to a tipping point. The ICJ opinion also reinforces the principle that those responsible for environmental harm should bear the cost of addressing it. That's the polluter pays principle. Historically, companies have largely been able to operate without accounting for the true cost of the damage they cause to the environment. They prioritize private profit over public good. And the damage is borne by local communities, by taxpayers, by the environment. But polluter pays litigation seeks to shift that accountability. Let me give two examples. In the US, there are 2.1 million unplugged oil and gas wells across the country, leaking methane into the environment. And that's because the big oil owners evade their obligations to plug the oil and gas wells at the end of their life. So we are doing a class action with Colorado landowners. Our Client Earth US is taking a class action with Colorado landowners to shift that accountability. And to come back to the Philippines for my other example, the victims of Typhoon Odette, which killed 400 people, injured thousands, and caused damage to the tune of $570 million, are suing Shell, the oil company, for the proportion of damage done, asking that Shell's contribution to pollution and climate change increase the intensity of that typhoon and the damage done. Now, these cases are really novel. They might not yet succeed. But let's be really clear. Polluter pays litigation, class actions, damages claims, when they scale, will change the calculations of polluting businesses, change their commercial viability and business model, and level the playing field for progressive business actors. So, as we look at the world around us, right now in particular, it can feel hard. You can feel powerless, too small to make a difference. It can feel like we are locked into a system built on fossil fuels, where decisions are taken far away about what people can afford, how they can live, how secure they feel. But around the world, as we're going to hear this afternoon, people are taking their future in their own hands. They are asserting their agency, their power in holding governments and corporates to account and driving change. We see it in the communities around the world advocating and litigating for clean air that has led to dramatic improvements in air quality. In the Klimaseniorinnen, the senior Swiss women who won a landmark case at the European Court of Human Rights, arguing that the Swiss government had a human rights obligation to address climate change. We see it in the youth in Hawaii who won a lawsuit that required the government to decarbonize its transport system. We see it in communities in Spain who last year, with our support, won a case focused on the human rights and health impacts of pollution from industrial pig farming. We see it in energy communities who are organizing to build local renewable energy capacity from the ground up. And quietly, without fuss, and often behind the scenes, we see it in the people who are working with and in governments and authorities in the Philippines and around the world, working painstakingly to get the right laws and regulatory frameworks in place to enable the change we need. Because if you change the laws, you change the rules of the game. Now, the progress we see comes from people, organizations, and communities mobilizing. People who have decided that the future can be different. And that's what gives me hope. The Pacific Islanders who secured the momentous decision from the ICJ last year weren't powerful or rich or influential, but they knew firsthand what was at stake. And they used the law to drive change, from the grassroots to the highest court of the world. And they shifted the baseline. Now, law is not a fast or quick fix. It requires courage and perseverance. It requires courageous failure. But it also provides stability and long-term thinking. It locks in intergenerational thinking, and that is what this moment requires. And in this room, at this conference, across the world, more and more people are resolute and determined. They know that a different future is possible, and they're working to help build it. Now, we know, of course, that change needs to come from all sectors of society, from all sectors of the economy. But the law, used in the right way, can catalyze that change. It can get us to the positive tipping points faster, and it can change our systems for the better. Thank you.
Can you guys still hear me? You can still hear me, great. Thank you so much, Laura. That really, really laid the foundations for the conversation we're about to have. So we're going to have a panel, and then we're going to have a fireside chat after that. There's lots to come. Before we do that, I'm just going to introduce a short 5-minute video, which you'll be able to hear in your headphones. And I know Laura mentioned quite a few cases there, but The main one at the heart of what she was talking about was the ICJ case that came from Vanuatu, the 27 students in a classroom who brought climate to the biggest court in the world. And this is Vishal. Vishal couldn't be here today because it was a 30-hour flight from Fiji. So I think we understand why he's not here, but we're very lucky that we can hear from him, and he'll just be giving us a 5-minute video.
Hello Vinaka everyone, and warm Pacific greetings. My name is Vishal Prasad and I'm from Fiji, and today I'm speaking on behalf of the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change, or PISFCC, a youth-led movement that began with a simple but urgent belief that young people, especially those of us from the Pacific, should not have to inherit a crisis we did not create and then be expected to face it in the silence. PISFCC started as a small group of law students from across the Pacific. We were witnessing climate change not as distant future threats, but as something already reshaping our lives, our communities, and our futures. We were seeing coastlines disappear, homes getting damaged, cultures placed under pressure, and whole communities being forced to carry the weight of decisions made far beyond our shores. And in the middle of all of that, we kept asking ourselves, what can we do to shift this? How do we move beyond being just spoken about and instead become part of shaping the response? That question led us into organizing, into advocacy and movement building, and ultimately into the campaign for an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on climate change. For us, that campaign was never only about the law. It was about justice. It was about making clear that climate change is not just a political issue or an environmental issue, it is also a matter of legal obligation, of accountability, of human rights. It was about helping create a pathway where voices of frontline communities, especially from the Pacific, could help shape one of the most important legal questions of our time. One of the biggest things we have learned along in this journey is that mobilization works best when it is both deeply human and deeply strategic. What has worked for us is building across different spaces at once. We've brought together young activism, legal advocacy, storytelling, diplomacy, and partnerships across regions and movements. We've worked with governments, with students, civil society, communities, and allies from all over the world. And through that, we've seen how powerful it can be when people come together around a clear moral purpose and a shared demand for justice. We've also learned that change is rarely about one big moment. It is usually built through consistency, through relationships, through trust, and showing up again and again, even when progress feels slow. Some of the most important work actually happens long before the spotlight even arrives. And another important lesson for us is that stories matter. For too long, Pacific communities have been framed only through vulnerability. But we were not just on the front lines of the crisis, we are also on the front lines of leadership. We are not only living through climate impacts, we are also helping shape legal, political, and moral responses to them. And when young people tell our own stories in our own voices, it changes how people understand what is at stake. And at the same time, we have to be honest as well. Even after major advocacy and legal breakthroughs, the world is still not moving fast enough. Too many countries are still failing to meet the level of action this crisis demands. Emissions remain too high, fossil fuel expansion continues, communities are still absorbing devastating loss and damage, and justice is still too often treated as something secondary when it should be at the center of the global response. So for us, the work now is about building on that milestone, the milestone that the ICJ advisory opinion gives us, and push it forward. The next phase of the campaign is about making sure that these legal and political gains really translate into real-world action. It means continuing to organize. It means pushing governments and institutions to respond with greater courage and accountability. It means connecting the legal progress to the everyday realities of people experiencing climate harm. And for all of us, it means continuing to build youth leadership so that this movement keeps growing stronger, deeper, and more connected. And this is where the upcoming UN General Assembly resolution matters so much. This resolution that has been introduced by the government of Vanuatu is an important opportunity for the international community to carry the momentum forward and show that the advisory opinion will not simply be welcomed in words, but acted on in practice. It is a chance for states to help move the world closer towards implementation, towards accountability and climate justice. And so part of our call right now is to encourage governments to support the most ambitious and meaningful version of such a UN General Assembly resolution, one that protects the strength of this moment and helps turn it into real collective action. And so I think the message at this point is simple. The world now has far less room to hide behind excuses. For too long, communities on the front lines have been telling the truth about what the climate crisis is doing to us. The science has also been clear. Young people have kept pushing. And now there is also enough legal clarity too. So what matters next is whether governments and institutions are willing to meet this moment with real responsibility. That is why what comes next is so important. That is why the UN General Assembly resolution is one of the key opportunities to show this momentum will actually go somewhere, and that it will help drive implementation, accountability, and stronger action. And that matters because progress cannot just be measured by what is being said in big moments. It has to be measured by what changes for people living with the impacts every day. From the Pacific, this has always been deeply personal. It is about our homes, our cultures, and our communities, and the future that we are fighting to protect. And this is why we will keep going, because too much is at stake to accept delay, and too much is possible to give up now. Vinaka Wakalevu, and thank you.
Thank you. A very, very powerful message there from Vishal. Just to remind everyone, if you've just arrived, this is a headphone stage, so you can put your headphones on and then you'll be able to hear us. It means I won't have to shout. That will be helpful. Thank you. Thank you so much again to Vishal. So, as he said, the most important work happened even before the international spotlight arrived. The spotlight's one thing, but the work has been going on for years in Vanuatu and in various islands across the South Pacific. But now it's about moving on from the advisory opinion from the UN, and obviously this is deeply personal for Vishal, and this is what we will explore today. So I'd like to welcome my panel to the stage. Please join me. Thank you. So if you guys want to take a mic, and then everyone will be able to hear you. Everyone's got a mic. You've got one already. Great. So Laura rejoins us. You've already met Laura. She's from Client Earth. And then next to Laura, we have Clara Tomé, who is a Spanish environmental lawyer and activist, known for her work at the intersection of law, youth engagement, and ecological justice. She's the co-founder of Rights and Roots, and also Eco Next Gen, where she works to translate complex environmental crises into relatable and community-rooted educational programs for students. Thirdly, we have Nicole Ponce. Nicole is an environmental and human rights lawyer advocate from the Philippines, with a strong interest in the intersection of law, science, and policy. She co-founded and is the advocacy lead for the World's Youth for Climate Justice, one of the youth-led organizations which was instrumental in securing the historic 2025 International Court of Justice advisory opinion we've just been talking about on climate change. Let's give them all just one more round of applause. Very, very impressive panel. Very impressive panel indeed. Nicole, I'm going to start with you first. Now, this is a big topic, but we're going to start with you because obviously you were there when this was just a classroom project in Fiji. Now we have a unanimous ICJ opinion from the court that says that the 1.5 degree Celsius limit isn't just a suggestion, it should be a legal benchmark. So from your perspective in the Philippines, how does it feel to finally move from this era of impunity that we see everywhere to potentially an era where the law actually recognizes the survival of your islands as a binding duty?
Yeah, thank you so much, Maeve. That's a very loaded question right there. But I guess I'd like to start by saying, sharing to everyone what the ICJ said when it said that, well, the ICJ advisory opinion gave us really a lot of things to work on. But I think when I was listening, when they were talking about talking about the decision already, this was during what Laura mentioned earlier on the 23rd of July, the ICJ said that the questions put to it by the General Assembly represent more than a legal problem. They concern an existential problem of planetary proportion. So at that moment, I said, well, this reached the court. They heard us. After 6, almost 7 years now of campaigning for this, they understood what we were trying to work for these last years, that this is more than just the law. This is about people and the planet. It's about justice. And, I say this often as what Vishal said earlier, this is deeply personal. My education in these issues did not primarily take place in university halls or the Grand Palais for that matter, but it was growing up in coastal towns in the Philippines and witnessing how corporate actors, enabled by weak regulations, are eroding our beaches with profit-only developments. And at the same time, you have rising seas swallowing what little coastline remains. So communities are defending threats against both fronts. So this is what entire peoples and nations and cultures have to contend with when we think about the climate crisis, because climate change exposes even broader injustices in democracy, in governance, in resource management, in protection. So that's why the ICJ advisory opinion is it's really a legal and moral breakthrough for climate ambition, and it was energized and led by the most affected. And that's what's really powerful about it. It has the capacity to reshape, it's part of a broader effort really to reshape how we see law and its capacity to shape international law. It goes with what Vishal said, it's actually beyond vulnerability, because we have people who've actually experienced the brunt of the climate crisis leading the solution. It's part of a broader effort to reimagine and reshape the dominant narratives and reimagine who participates in and influences international law.
Thank you, Nicole. And how are you feeling about the vote? Because the vote in the UN is happening this week. I know you're instrumental, you're really involved in that. If the vote passes in the UN, what will that mean? Will that mean that this kind of era of excuses is finally over?
Oh yeah, that's a really tough question as well. Well, basically because the UNG resolution that's happening right now, this isn't the first time. We did this before in 2023, but this one it's really a political moment to be seized. It's a very important opportunity so that, as what Vishal said, we already have, there's enough clarity. So the challenge before us right now is really not an interpretation anymore, but implementation, because clarity alone will not stop floods from inundating our homes. So the UNG resolution will operationalize the ICJ-AO, so it's not relegated to just a legal text, but provide that guidance for states. So that's also, it plays several roles, and probably we'll touch upon that more earlier, but I'll end with that.
Thank you. Clara, I'm going to turn to you because I know you do a lot of grassroots work on the ground. From your perspective, when we see these kind of the major powers like we're seeing in the US right now in the White House, trying to backtrack essentially on these decisions, backtrack on their duty of care to the planet, it can often feel like we're back to this kind of voluntary thing, like voluntary weakness of the Paris Agreement. You know, we're sitting here in Paris where the Paris Agreement was actually signed, but we haven't really got that far from it. And in your grassroots work, you know, how do you keep hope alive when the political headwinds are so stormy?
Yeah, this is a good question, right? And I don't think the question is how do we keep like hope alive when major powers like the U.S. Step back, right? Like from the Paris Agreement or whatever. Because I do think hope should not depend on them. If our hope just depend on this type of like major powers, then our hope is very fragile, right? So I think hope needs to be something that we build, and it's built on movements like this, definitely. And of course, it creates despair. Like we need to be honest, it creates despair. But at the end, it's very clarifying because it reveals how the system works, and that the system, it was never designed to protect people and ecosystems in the first place. So that gives us, that gives us despair, but at the same time, kind of like, we need to make peace with that. We need to make peace that that is the system that we are fighting against, and that is why we need to, you know, become responsible somehow and get on that kind of like active hope that we need to build and not just feel, because otherwise it's a passive hope that not everybody is able like to, you know, work in.
Passive hope never works.
Exactly. And I think like it's important, as she was saying, to understand, as Laura was pointing as well, that for me the hope actually is not on those big kind of like countries stepping in or stepping back from climate policies. It is on the ground, because it's on the ground where we are seeing actually these transformative, you know, movements and legal shifts, you know, whether it is with the ICG or whether it's with, you know, legal innovations as rights of nature in our case. So this is where I really find hope, when I see like communities really like changing the norms, or youth, you know, because what I see, for example, in schools when I give talks or I present this type of successful cases, people is really surprised because youth tend to think that we are really like disconnect from where the decision-making spaces or the climate laws are being decided. So I think it's a way to reclaim our power as well. And at the end, it's in cases like this, or in cases like, for example, just on January, we were working with the communities in the Amazon to revoke a presidential decree that was trying to privatize a river to convert it in a soy highway. And it was not a proposal of a law. It was a law that was already there, approved, and that had a lot of economic interests, you know, very powerful ones from Cargill. I don't know if you guys know Cargill, but it's a big agribusiness. So it was a huge challenge. How can we, you know, like revoke a presidential decree that is already there? And seeing the power of the communities, you know, occupying this Cargill company for a month, and we together creating like a huge campaign, you know, with different skills. We're not, most of the people is not even like, you know, legal experts or whatever, but just having like, you know, that courage and that passion to preserve what gives them life, as it is a river. That was incredible to me, because even as a legal expert, I was like, okay, I don't think this is gonna happen too quick, or it might not even happen. And after a month, I remember I was going to sleep and the community just called me. I was kind of like almost sleeping, and they just called me. I'm like, what is happening? Like, is everything all right? And they're like, you know what? Like, it was revoked. I'm like, what? Wow. It was revoked, and I was crying. We were like so emotionally. So those are the cases that gave me hope, for sure. I'm not really, you know, putting all my hopes or all my energy into the fact that the U.S., you know, is stepping back. Where I'm focusing is on cases like these, like the ICG, and that's what, you know, keeps me going on our mission.
Amazing. Thank you, Clara. I feel like I want to clap you, but I don't have two hands. Can everyone help me? It's amazing to keep hope, but I agree with you that hope can never be passive, and we are still facing so many obstacles, so we have to lead with, obviously, with agency. I just want to go back to a few of those obstacles with you, Laura, now that you're back. Just, you know, in terms of this ICJ ruling, you know, what we're seeing right now, even though it is very positive, is that some big oil companies like Shell cite the ICJ ruling in their own defense. they're claiming that they're kind of already compliant and they're not breaking the law. So how do we stop the oil giants from hijacking this ruling? Because some of them are almost trying to use it as a shield at the moment.
So it's a good question. I think this goes back to the narratives that are deployed by big oil, right? And they're often very, very misleading narratives. You'll hear big fossil fuel companies claiming that they are leading the transition to renewable energy when actually they're 99% invested in fossil fuels, for example. And we actually won a case against Total Energies last year. You're essentially exposing their advertising campaign as misleading, and the courts, the Paris courts, required them to change their advertising and display the judgment on their website. So this is always going to happen, and actually any organization has a right to argue whatever it wants in court. What matters, of course, is the truth of it. It's the facts and what is actually being done. And I think what we're really clear about now is we need a legal regulatory approach for scaling down fossil fuels. And that needs to be a demand reduction regulatory strategy. We had something similar with tobacco in the tobacco industry back in the day. And what does that look like? What do we need? Well, we need prohibitions on influence. Actually there should be limits on big oil being at things like climate conferences. There should be limits on advertising. Some cities are banning fossil fuel advertising. Amsterdam has, for example. There should be limits on sponsorship from fossil fuel companies. And then we need proactive information campaigns so that the public really understands what is at stake here. So I think it's really important. And what I would say is, there is progress. We are seeing some governments beginning to coordinate on what a managed transition away from fossil fuels looks like. And there's this conference that's happening in April this year, and with Colombia and the Netherlands convening the first conference on transitioning away from fossil fuels in Santa Marta, and that's designed to be a first in a series of conferences, really about how do you do a smooth transition away from fossil fuels. So there is a lot going on. Of course, we will always see those industries that have a vested interest in the fossil fuel status quo doing all they can to defend the status quo. And what we need to do is expose their false narratives and find ways of driving the change and overcoming that inertia.
And with the ruling that's coming up this week in the US, is that down to Trump himself, whether it goes through or not?
Sorry, which ruling?
Sorry, what's being decided this week in New York?
Is it down to Trump?
Is it down to Trump?
So I think that the issue with multilateralism is that you're trying to bring everyone to the table. I think what we're seeing right now is we have to keep going with multilateralism and trying all we can and corralling people. But we're also seeing at the same time the development of plurilateral and minilateral approaches, right? Coalitions of the willing driving change. Because I'm afraid our international system was designed in a very, very different era. It doesn't reflect, it was really designed by the victors of World War II. It was still in a time of empire. It really doesn't reflect the interests and the world that we are in now. So there are real limitations to that system. So we need to reform it, but we also need to be finding out where we can make progress.
And the Fossil Fuel Conference in Santa Marta is the first step, really, because it's formally outside of the UN context, and it's the first time that's ever going to happen. And Nicole, I'm sure you want to touch on that a bit, especially for you. How is the youth movement kind of pivoting, especially with this week and what's happening, making sure that the political pressure on Trump and in New York isn't watered down?
Yeah, I think that's very important because, well, what we really need right now is for states to meet the urgency of the climate crisis. We cannot allow action to stall because delay is no longer defensible. So that's the point in this case. And then way back in the 2023 UNGA vote, it was the same thing. States were also, there was a lot of contention and there was a lot of pushback. It was thought to be too ambitious. In fact, the whole ICJAO campaign was thought to be too ambitious. And yet, here we are now. But that's exactly the point, because what we need is more ambitious climate action. And I think that our role as young legal advocates, I would like to say young movement lawyers, is what Laura and Clara here has touched on earlier as well, is that our role is to organize for ambition and to push and meet the ambition and implementation gap. That's really our goal. And we've done this before, and now what we're witnessing is really this global solidarity, and we're not backing down. And only now we have an even broader alliance of national and regional allies to engage with governments, to request meetings with our leaders, to issue public statements, to send out letters and write to them, and to organize protests and march. So this is the kind of global solidarity that the other states are now having to deal with, because before they say, even during the 2023 vote, I think most of these major high polluting states were really blindsided, because the 2023 UNGA resolution was adopted by consensus. They didn't even have the chance to vote on it and say no. We didn't give them that chance, because what they thought of as small island developing states are actually large ocean states. And I believe and really hopeful that this is what's going to happen again for the vote.
Thank you, Nicole. And I want to talk a bit about allyship and kind of all of us in this room and how we can basically get involved, how, when it comes to whether it's grassroots action, whether it's engaging with legal frameworks. Clara, maybe you can help us with that, because I know that part of the work you do is translating some of these quite complex legal cases for younger generations. For a young person, say, in Spain or in France or in the UK, often I'd say international law can feel quite far away, especially if they're in islands like in the South Pacific or in the Philippines. How do you explain the tangible power of the Pacific-led victory to them?
I think it's a lot on not necessarily like, the legal side of things, because not everybody's an expert, of course, especially on the schools that I give, because it's not law schools, by the way, it's just general schools. But it's more towards making them understand how important is organizing and collective power. And this ruling shows that ordinary people, I'm not calling you ordinary, by the way, Nicole, you are extraordinary, but, ordinary people, like young people, like a group of students, people in the ground, can really shift global norms. And this is a major thing, because as I was saying, even myself, before entering into law, and even during my career, I was thinking that as a young person, I feel so powerless and so far from all of these spaces where the decisions are made. So things like this, or like I've seen like a different, initiatives that started on the bottom and were, pulled up into the top, shows, that we need to reclaim that power that the system has told that we don't have. And to understand that laws are not fossil, are not untouchable. They are living tools and they can evolve. Yeah. So this is very important to show case studies like this to young people and to people that are not legal experts or lawyers, that they also can have an impact on, on international legal frameworks.
And of course, community organizing isn't just young people. I mean, it's all ages, from what I've seen. Do we think, all of us, that this ICJ ruling will make it easier in future for an individual citizen to, kind of sue an oil company or maybe even their own country?
Should I give it a go? So I think, in principle, yes, to sue its government, right? Because this is really about the obligations of states. But it depends on the jurisdiction of the state concerned what the issue is. But domestic courts will always have reference to, things like the ICJ advisory opinion. They will refer to what international law requires. And I think for an individual, it does mean it's becoming easier to ground legal claims in internationally recognized standards and scientific benchmarks. And so probably it just means that more of these cases will succeed, right? It strengthens the arm of work that's already happening. Yeah. It's worth saying that we are already seeing the ICJ advisory opinion being used in cases around the world. And we saw it most recently in the Bonaire decision. So I don't know if you heard about this, but essentially the District Court of The Hague referred to the ICJ advisory opinion in the case that it heard of Greenpeace Netherlands versus the state of the Netherlands. And the issue was essentially that the Netherlands had violated the human rights of the residents of the tiny Caribbean island of Bonaire, which is a Dutch overseas territory, by failing to protect them from the effects of climate change. So we are really seeing it used and referred to now to strengthen some of these cases on states' obligations and particularly on human rights.
And this might be a bit of a tricky question, but do you think we'll see anyone go to jail over this? Whether it's a CEO, whether it's a politician?
I mean, I think no, because this is not really about criminal law. This is much more about states' obligations. But I do think it's a good question, because I think what we're pointing to much more is about what are the obligations, and if you have obligations and you don't meet them, you can be liable, right? And you know, one of the sort of drivers, theories of change is that you can, if you really sort of shine the spotlight on the liability of individuals if they do the wrong thing, whether that's directors on the board of a company for not managing climate risk, then I think we are going to see that as a real pressure to drive change. And you know, who knows how things might evolve further in the future.
Who knows? Well, we'll keep an eye out for Client Earth's work. Nicole, we've only got 2 minutes left, and then we're going to move on to another discussion coming next, which is about Antarctica and the legal rights there. Nicole, how would you like to end this? What are you looking forward to next? And what do you think still remains the biggest barrier in climate justice today?
That's a tough question. Well, I think if there's something I'd like to leave from this session, it's really that the thing with systemic change to be embedded within institutions. There's no really single strategy or intervention. It's really layered, and it has multi-dimensions. And I think like legal policy, legal advocacy, and also supplemented with policy decision-making and community mobilization and front lines and communities, all of these together are really important. And law is a very effective tool, a vehicle for climate justice, but it has to come from all fronts.
Thank you. Clara, any last words from you?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think I'm very excited for the future in law itself, because we're seeing already legal innovations. My colleague Roberta is going to talk more about that. But I also work on rights of nature, and to see so many initiatives, you know, being developed that recognize ecosystems as living entities with inherent rights. That's something that we're so happy to see, and is something that is growing, because we have come to understand that environmental law itself, it doesn't protect nature at the end. It just tells you how much you can exploit, how much you can extract, but it doesn't recognize nature as the living entity that it is. So I think that's why we are getting, you know, creative, and of course this is a cosmovision that comes from indigenous peoples on the way they relate to nature, and that's something that we in the global north need to learn more and need to apply into our legal systems and shift those systems to be more ecocentric and less anthropocentric.
Ecocentric, not egocentric, I presume. Exactly. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Please give a massive applause to my panel. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So it's time for our next discussion, which is all about Antarctica. And as Clara just spoke about, we will be talking about the rights of Antarctica as legal personhood. So almost like a river or a forest. Can Antarctica itself have rights? And so our next guest is a storyteller and a strategist whose work is all about centering the rights of Antarctica. She isn't a lawyer, she's a campaigner on a mission to pass the Declaration for the Rights of Antarctica, to recognize the continent as a living entity with its own right to exist, rather than a no man's land, which it is currently, which is being exploited. She works closely with indigenous communities from New Zealand to Canada to bring ancestral wisdom into the frozen South. So please welcome Global Campaign Lead for the Antarctic Rights Alliance, Roberta Bosu.
thanks for the disclaimer that I'm not a lawyer.
You're not a lawyer.
Exactly,
We've
thanks.
got that.
We got that.
We won't hold you liable for anything that you say.
Exactly.
Thank you, Roberta. So
Thank you.
tell us about your work. Antarctica is the only place on Earth that no one owns. Just think about that for a sec. No one owns Antarctica. So to some, I think that makes it a sanctuary, but to others, it means that it's ripe for exploitation because it can't stand up for itself, basically. I believe there was a historic ban on mining in the region a few years ago, but that's being weakened at the moment. Tell us why it's so urgent now that we give Antarctica legal personhood before the oil drillers arrive.
So Antarctica is an earth keeper. And that's something that I always want to highlight, because for a lot of people, and including me before working on this campaign, Antarctica was just a block of ice in the south, in the bottom of the world, full of penguins and whales. That's it, it's cold, I'm not gonna go there, no. But actually Antarctica is very much connected with all of us. Is connecting the global currents in the ocean, the global weathers, is really affecting our daily lives, but no one of us is actually thinking about it. And Antarctica doesn't have a voice, because if you think even about the global conferences, like the UN conference, we all have our own tag, Italy, Spain, all the countries. Where is Antarctica? Because the fact that there is no indigenous population in Antarctica means that it doesn't have a seat in this international decision-making processes. And so it means that there is no voice. Like, you cannot really hear what Antarctica wants and what Antarctica has to say. And this is making it also a special place, because at the same time, we all belong to Antarctica. We can all be citizens of Antarctica. And so this makes it also an opportunity of rethinking what's happening. So at the moment, just from a governance perspective, there is the Antarctic Treaty System. There is a treaty that was signed on 1959 by 12 countries that then became 29, and then right now there are 58, and only 29 countries take decisions by consensus. So let it sink. 58 countries out of 195, and the Pacific Islands are not even included in this treaty. So from a governance perspective, then one of the articles is binding mining, so what you said as well. And there is the option in 2048, so 50 years after that the Antarctic Treaty System has been signed, to review this mining ban. Of course, it's going to be difficult as well, because it needs to have a consensus, it needs to be proposed. Yeah. But what we need to consider is also that, yes, this treaty is strong, but the context outside is changing, like the US, Russia, and all this research for resources is increasing.
And currently, just to check, there is no mining going on currently in Antarctica,
no.
Because the ban is in place.
Yes. But there are some rumors that something is happening, like some research, and that there is the will, for sure.
There is the will, sadly. So that brings me nicely to the next question, because obviously we've seen recently Trump and the US administration looking at Greenland, for its mineral wealth and for national security reasons, is what they say. When a world leader talks about buying or securing a territory like Greenland, or Antarctica, how dangerous actually is that? What's the threat when there are no local people there to say no?
Yeah, I think this is coming back to what Clara was mentioning before. So we all see the things related to humans as well. Like, if you think, okay, there is no one in Antarctica, then we just think it's an empty place. But actually, Antarctica itself is there. The ecosystems are there. So we don't have humans beside the scientists and the scientific bases that are there, but there are whales, there are crees, there are penguins. So you don't have the voice of maybe humans like it's happening in Greenland, luckily protesting against what Trump wants. But the ecosystems are there. And that's actually also what we want with Antarctic rights, that this voice that maybe is not the same language that we are speaking at the moment, but is represented. And so recognizing the rights of Antarctica and the rights of all the ecosystems, including the Southern Ocean, will give the options to actually have this grassroots initiative arriving directly from Antarctica. Antarctica can sit on a court and sue, let's say, Trump. That's the ideal word for me as well. But you really have like the voice of Antarctica, the voice of ecosystems that can really fight against those this anthropocentric view as well, because that's the point. If you think, okay, there is no one that can really raise the voice, then it's always from a human-centric perspective. I can do something. I can see Antarctica and ecosystems that are a resource.
Giving nature its own voice.
Yeah.
So just for some more examples for people, obviously Clara already mentioned the river in northern Spain that she was helping to give legal personhood to. There's also in New Zealand, there are two places, the Wanganui River and also the Te Urewera Forest. These places have both been given legal personhood. So the river or the forest itself can sue, can sit in a court of law and defend itself. Tell us, also, I've heard that they're thinking about doing that for whales as well, for the animals.
Yeah,
whales.
there is a proposal.
Whales are also being considered to be given legal personhood. Tell us, is that what they've done in New Zealand? Does that provide a roadmap for what you're doing in Antarctica?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people think that we are just tree huggers or rebels.
Ice huggers.
Exactly. Or whales lovers. We are. But there are precedents all around the world. It's not only in New Zealand. There are 40 countries around the world that are recognizing rights of nature in some ways, like more than 200 laws. Ecuador has it in the constitution, actually, since 2008. So we have a blueprint that we can follow. There are examples, there are successes. I still remember when I heard about rights of nature the first time, and they told me about the story of a small frog that actually went to court to fight against a mining company.
Wow.
Please check it out, because it was very powerful, and I really wish that we can live in a world where I can see a penguin go to court,
It sounds like
river.
a children's storybook in the best way. A little
Yeah.
frog goes to court. I would read that.
Yeah, exactly. And also, when I talk to children about it, they don't think it's a weird idea. It's always when I talk to grow up that they are always like looking at the details. Oh yes, but how we can do that? How we can? I think we need to bring back the imagination. Bring back also remembering what is our relationship with nature. I was also listening to a panel with some Maori actually before 1 hour ago, and they were really like talking about the relationship with whales, for example. And I think that's also what we need to bring back into also the legal system. As they said, again, disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, but law can be a very powerful tool, so we need to use it.
Yeah. And just going back to the people, because we've been talking about Antarctica, you've been working with both the Maori and the Tahitian communities as well, so Tahiti and from New Zealand, as well as First Nations in Canada.
Yep.
People might wonder, why involve those people in a place where no one lives? What do these cultures maybe understand about the rights of the Southern Ocean that Western law has ignored for so long?
One thing that I learned from Antarctica is actually that you don't need to live in a place to have a relationship with that place. And also you don't need to experience that place to have a relationship with that place. I've never been to Antarctica. I never saw a whale. I'm obsessed with whales as well. I'm obsessed with Antarctica. And so the point, I think, for me is that you don't really need to be there to advocate for it. Or I think it's also sometimes, I said, empathy, basic subscription. Like, I don't need to know all the humankind to be empathetic, to support, for example, Philippines. I've never been there. So I think that's the first definition, the first thing that I wanted to say. And the second is also, there are stories that the Maori, the people in the Pacific have about Antarctica. So they have really a strong relationship with Antarctica, even though they've never been there or they've been there in the past. Because one thing that I also want to mention is that Vishad also said, there is this image of Antarctica as well that is fragile place, a place that needs to be protected, a bit of a victim portrait, a mindset. And Antarctica has been portrayed also as a place that needed to be conquered by, of course, white male. But there is a different stories about Antarctica, women being in Antarctica, indigenous people that have this relationship. So also what we do with Antarctic rights is to not using indigenous people as a token or as a symbol, but really learn from them.
Yeah.
Like what is the relationship that they have with the ecosystems, with the rivers, with the mountains, with the glaciers, and how can we learn from that and put that into a system like our legal systems. And that's where I think also Nicole was mentioning before, it's the collaboration with different expertises, different backgrounds, different tools and mindsets.
So important what we can learn from them. And so, you know, just for us sitting here right now in Paris, if the Antarctic ice sheet melts, the sea will rise by 58 meters. And what that would do is that would physically erase the Pacific Islands we were just talking about. They would cease to exist. And I think that's something really important for us to bring into this conversation right now, because as you say, Antarctica can feel really far away. It's just a place for penguins, but it's not. It actually underpins a lot of our civilization and a lot of what we do. So what I want to ask you about, lastly, is this idea of treating nature as kind of natural capital, because I've heard that spoken about quite a lot at Change Now over the last few years. And in Antarctica, that would mean basically putting a price tag on the ice to show and to represent its economic value. You've called this a double-edged sword. Is there a risk, do you think, that by putting a price on nature, we kind of just make it easier for someone to buy it and then they can destroy it? Or is it a chance to invest money into a continent that really needs it?
I'm totally against this. So I will make an example. I will give you an example. So I'm Italian. I love food. I make an amazing focaccia. I know, Italian cliché. So let's say that I deserve to live just because I bake this amazing focaccia. And so you are kind of giving me this value. You are just allowing me to exist just because I'm useful for something. When actually I just have the rights and I deserve to thrive, to exist just because I exist. And it's the same for nature. It's not just because Antarctica is an earth keeper that deserves to live. Maybe Antarctica can just be there, mind their own business, and that's it. It would be perfectly fine as well. So if we put a price on nature, we're also implicitly saying that nature is a resource, is a commodity, and can be traded. So I think what we need to really change is that nature is not an object, it's not a resource, but we are part of nature. So if you're saying this about Antarctica or a river, then you can say the same for me, as I said, or just for you, like you're just useful because you are a very good writer. But no, you can just be yourself too, and it's the same for nature. And that's a bit of the mindset that in the global north we need to have and we need to change. It's just nature has the right to thrive and to exist just because is a living entity.
I was talking to Nemonte Nankimo earlier, who's part of the Waorani tribe, lives in the Amazon in Ecuador, and she was saying that the word nature doesn't exist in Ecuador because humans, trees, plants are all the same, so they don't separate nature from humans, and it reminds me a bit of what you're saying there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So very last question, because we have to end now, but this is such a fascinating conversation. I think we could be here for another 2 hours. So last question is, if you could take one diplomat or a politician currently, who's arguing, for example, in New York at the moment or at the UNGA, and drop them in the middle of the Antarctic ice shelf for 10 minutes, what is the one thing you think they would understand then that they currently don't now?
I will challenge this question because, as I said before, I don't think you need to be there.
Yeah.
So probably actually to see the consequences of what's happening in Antarctica, because that's also the point. Like, it's not you are having deforestation in the Amazon and you see it, it's there, it's happening. Like, all of us burning fossil fuels all over the world has a consequence in Antarctica. And I don't need to be strictly in Antarctica to see that. I can be in the Philippines. So I think that's also, like, I will make them think about this connection. Like, you can bring someone everywhere in the world and already be experiencing that this is happening in the Philippines, this is happening in Italy, I live in the Netherlands, I'm from Sardinia, so I'm already living that as well. So I think that's probably, I think you don't need to be in Antarctica to see it. We are already causing this here and right now.
Very last question. You're Italian. What
Yes.
made you get involved in Antarctica? You've never been? Just tell us
No.
your personal connection.
Just short, like, if I have to summarize everything in an answer, is ignorance. Because I'm from Sardinia, I'm from an island, and I study diplomacy. And so I should be aware of sea level rises. And again, I live in the Netherlands, so I'm surrounded by water. I should be worried. And I also should know what was happening in the governance of Antarctica, and I didn't know. And then I really thought, if even me, then I'm already like in a privileged position as a white woman in the global north, I don't know about it, and I didn't care about it, then yeah, I should be better. And so it literally came from ignorance. And then I discovered a different world. I discovered a super colorful place. Antarctica is not white. Check it out, the pictures. That's also why I wanted to have this picture, because it's an amazing place. And like, I love whales, I love krill. Krill is this super small shrimp that is the base of the food chain, and it glows. You can see it from the space. Check it out as well. Like, it's really an amazing place, and I think once you discover about Antarctica and our relationship with Antarctica, there is no way back. So,
Thank you so much, Roberta Bosu.
thank you.
Thank you. What a fascinating conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming, and I will see you soon.
Thank you, Maeve. I almost got emotional.